I'll let the attorney know if necessary, I said carefully. She laughed nervously. Of course. That's what I meant. We hung up. I stood in my kitchen afterward, phone still in my hand, heart racing. Because now I was sure of one thing. This wasn't just about money Grandpa had saved. It was about money someone had expected to control. And whatever Grandpa had seen coming, he had planned for it. He had left a trail, quiet, deliberate, and placed it exactly where the wrong people would never look. What I didn't realize then was that finding the account was only the beginning. The real test wasn't whether I could claim it. It was whether I could survive what would happen when the people who thought they'd won discovered the game wasn't over. And the moment they did, the family I thought I knew would disappear. And something far uglier would take its place that I didn't go back to the lawyer right away. That was instinct, not strategy. Something inside me warned that the moment I spoke, everything would change, not just the situation, but how people looked at me. And once that happened, there would be no undoing it. Instead, I reread Grandpa's notebook. Slowly, carefully, like it was speaking in a language meant only for patients. Dates lined up too neatly to be coincidence. Transfers happened shortly after family meetings. Large withdrawals appeared days before medical appointments my aunt had insisted on attending. And then there were the notes that weren't about money at all. They ask about costs but not care. Too eager when discussing what's left. Silence is safer. My chest ached reading them. Because I recognized that silence. It was the same silence Grandpa used when people talked over him. When opinions were decided before facts. When smiles carried expectations. He hadn't been passive. He'd been measuring. I made copies of everything. Not digital, physical. Grandpa would have approved. Then I did something that made my hands shake. I called the bank. The account existed. Active. Untouched. When the representative confirmed the balance, my stomach dropped all over again. Not from shock this time, but from certainty. This was real. And someone had deliberately excluded it from the estate process. What I didn't realize then, I thought as I hung up, was that omissions can be louder than lies. I reviewed the will again, the version the lawyer had read. The language was careful. Narrow. It spoke only of assets included in the estate, not everything Grandpa owned. Legal. Clean. Too clean. That afternoon, my uncle stopped by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood, he said, standing in my doorway, eyes drifting past me like he expected to see something familiar. Come in, I said, keeping my voice steady. He sat on the couch but didn't relax. His gaze flicked toward the bag near the desk, toward the corner where Grandpa's papers were stacked. So, he said, anything interesting in the desk? There it was. I smiled politely. Just old bills and notes. He nodded, but his jaw tightened. You know, he said, leaning forward, if there's anything important, it should be shared. Grandpa would have wanted that. Would he? I pictured Grandpa's careful handwriting. The false drawer. The instructions not to trust verbal assurances. I'll follow the will, I replied. He studied me, not like family, but like opposition. Good, he said finally. That's best for everyone. When he left, my hands were trembling. Not from fear. From confirmation. What I didn't realize then, what became painfully clear, was that they weren't worried about Grandpa's wishes. They were worried about discovery. That night, I found one last note in the notebook, tucked into the back cover like an afterthought. If you're reading this, you found it. Don't rush. Truth survives patience. I pressed my fingers to the page and closed my eyes. He had known. Not everything, but enough. The next step was obvious. I needed a different lawyer. One who wasn't already comfortable with the version of events my family preferred. I made the appointment quietly. No announcements. No confrontations. No hints. Because Grandpa hadn't hidden the money out of fear. He'd hidden it to reveal something else. And I was beginning to understand what. The account wasn't just an inheritance. It was a test. And soon, I would find out exactly who failed it. The new lawyer didn't rush me. That was how I knew I'd chosen correctly. She read everything. Every statement, every note, every margin comment Grandpa had written in his careful hand. She didn't interrupt. Didn't make assumptions. She asked questions only after she'd finished. And when she finally looked up at me, her expression had shifted. This wasn't overlooked, she said plainly. It was excluded. The word settled heavily between us. Intentionally? I asked. She nodded. Your grandfather structured this account outside the estate. Perfectly legal. But the fact that the original attorney didn't disclose its existence raises serious ethical concerns. Ethical. That word was colder than anger. Who would have known? I asked. She leaned back slightly. Anyone he told. Anyone who helped draft the will. Anyone who benefited from the assumption that nothing else existed. I thought of my aunt's smile. My uncle's sudden visit. The lawyer's confidence when he said no liquid assets of significant value. What happens now? I asked. She folded her hands. Now we proceed carefully. Carefully. That was Grandpa's word too. We filed a request for full disclosure, not accusations, not demands. Just documentation. Paper answers to paper questions. Within days, the tone shifted. My aunt called again. This time, she didn't pretend to be casual. I heard you're talking to another lawyer, she said. I paused. Who told you that? Silence. Then a sharp exhale. You're making this complicated. No denial. No confusion. Just irritation. I'm making it accurate, I replied. Her voice dropped. We already settled everything. No, I said quietly. You settled what you expected. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. You're reading too much into this. Grandpa didn't have money like that. I said nothing, because silence was starting to work. The next call came from the original attorney. His tone was professional but strained. There's been some confusion, he said. We can clarify matters privately. Privately. I declined. What I didn't realize then, I thought as I ended the call, was how quickly people ask for discretion when they're afraid of records. The paperwork came in waves. Emails. Amendments. Explanations that explained nothing. Then one document stood out. A memo. Internal. Never meant for me. It referenced an external account and included a note. Client requested exclusion. Family not informed per instruction. Per instruction. Grandpa's instruction. My hands shook as I read it, because now the story was clear. Grandpa hadn't been deceived. He had been cautious. And someone had tried to benefit from that caution by turning it into silence. My aunt showed up at my door that evening. No smile. No softness. You're tearing the family apart, she said. I met her gaze calmly. I didn't hide anything. She scoffed. You think Grandpa trusted you over us? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because the truth was already written. In ink, in dates, in balances that refused to disappear no matter how loudly they denied them. She left angry. And in that anger, something important broke. The illusion that this had ever been about fairness. What I didn't realize then was that money doesn't reveal greed. It reveals expectation. And my family had expected silence. They had counted on my grief. My politeness. My hesitation. They hadn't counted on Grandpa's preparation. Or my patience. The lawyer called the next morning. They're backing down, she said. Quietly. Of course they were. Because there was no argument left to make. The account was legally mine, designated beneficiary, documented, unquestionable. But what stayed with me wasn't the victory. It was the clarity. This wasn't about $480,000. It was about who Grandpa believed would do the right thing when the noise started. And as the final paperwork moved into place, I realized something unsettling and strangely comforting at the same time. The man they thought left nothing had actually left me everything I needed to see them clearly. The family dinner was supposed to be about closure. That's what my aunt called it when she invited everyone over. Her voice overly calm, her words carefully chosen like she was still managing optics. I went anyway, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to see their faces when silence stopped protecting them. They sat around the table the way they always had. My uncle leaning back too comfortably, my cousin scrolling on his phone, my aunt at the head, hands folded like she was hosting a meeting instead of a reckoning. Conversation stayed light at first. Weather. Work. Someone's upcoming vacation. No one mentioned Grandpa. No one mentioned lawyers. Then my aunt cleared her throat. Well, she said, smiling thinly, I suppose everything has been sorted. Sorted. I set my fork down gently. Yes, I said. It has. The table went quiet. My uncle frowned. What do you mean? I continued evenly. The account Grandpa excluded from the estate has been transferred. My cousin looked up. My aunt froze. What account? She asked too quickly. I met her eyes. The one in his desk. Her smile collapsed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. It just vanished. My uncle shifted in his seat. That's not legal. I finished for him. It is. Silence pressed in. And in that silence, something raw surfaced. My aunt laughed bitterly. You went behind our backs. I shook my head. I followed his instructions. You're tearing this family apart over money, she snapped. No, I replied calmly. I'm exposing what was already broken. Her face flushed. He would have wanted us to share. I didn't raise my voice. Then he would have written it that way. That landed. Because no one at that table could argue with ink and signatures. My cousin muttered something under his breath. My uncle stared at his plate. The authority they'd carried so easily at the lawyer's office was gone. Replaced by discomfort. By realization. By the knowledge that Grandpa had seen them clearly and acted accordingly. What I didn't realize then was how fast entitlement turns into outrage when expectations collapse. You think you're better than us now, my aunt said quietly. I looked at her, really looked, and felt something unexpected. Not anger. Pity. I think Grandpa knew who he could trust, I said. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. This isn't over. I nodded. It is. Because there was nothing left to contest. The documents were finalized. The account transferred. The trail complete. The dinner ended early. People left without goodbyes. Without explanations. The house felt colder as I stepped outside. But I felt lighter. What I didn't realize then was that confrontation wasn't the hardest part. It was the aftermath. The calls that didn't come. The holidays that grew quieter. The subtle shift from family to relatives. And yet, I slept better than I had in months. Because I hadn't taken something that wasn't meant for me. I had protected something that was. The money sat untouched for weeks after that. I didn't celebrate. Didn't spend. Didn't announce. Because its value wasn't in what it could buy. It was in what it confirmed. Grandpa hadn't left nothing. He'd left discernment. And he'd trusted me with it. The last message I ever received from my aunt was short. He wouldn't have wanted this. I didn't reply. Because for the first time, I was certain of something that didn't require defending. I knew exactly what Grandpa had wanted. And I had honored it that I finally returned to Grandpa's house alone. Not to search. Not to investigate. Just to sit. I walked through each room slowly, touching familiar surfaces. The worn armrest of his chair, the bookshelf he never reorganized, the clock that always ran 5 minutes fast. The desk drawer was empty now. The false panel removed. Nothing left to hide. I sat in his chair and let the quiet settle. What you really left, I whispered, was clarity. The money would change my life in practical ways, security, options, freedom. But the real inheritance had already done its work. It had shown me who people became when they thought no one was watching. Who stayed quiet for convenience. Who smiled for advantage. Who counted on grief to keep the truth buried. Grandpa had known. And instead of confronting it loudly, he had documented it. Instead of arguing, he had prepared. That was his justice. The lawyer called a few days later to confirm everything was complete. No further challenges, she said. They've accepted it. Accepted. That word felt small compared to what had happened. But it was enough. I donated a portion quietly, to causes Grandpa cared about but never spoke of publicly. I saved the rest. Not out of fear. Out of respect. And when people asked what Grandpa left me, I told them the truth. He left me exactly what he intended to. No numbers. No drama. Just truth. They said Grandpa left nothing. And in a way, they were right. He didn't leave chaos. He didn't leave conflict. He didn't leave room for interpretation. He left proof. Proof that modesty isn't the absence of wealth. It's the absence of noise. Proof that preparation doesn't look like suspicion. It looks like care. Proof that trust is given quietly, not equally. I didn't win anything. I uncovered it. And that made all the difference. Because inheritance isn't just about money. It's about intention. And Grandpa's intention had been clear all along. If you knew where to look and when to stay silent. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.